Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the so-called email scandal of Hillary Clinton. Specifically, we'll discuss why the evidence shows Clinton did not commit a crime and why she did not get any beneficial treatment from the FBI. Part B. Bogus comparisons underlie special treatment talk. The comparisons of Clinton's case to all others discussed in Part A are deeply flawed for failing to account for significant differences between these cases. In fact, many comparisons are straight out false or misleading. For instance, several people were prosecuted or faced the threat of criminal charges, in part because they intentionally disclosed classified information to individuals not authorized to view that information. Here is a list of 7 commonly cited names of people who have been compared to Clinton. Edward Snowden has not been charged since he left the US, but he divulged classified NSA documents to many journalists, including Glenn Greenwald. Others like Jeffrey Sterling, Thomas Drake, Stephen Kim, and John Kiriakou likewise were whistleblowers who were targeted for prosecution in part because of intentional disclosures of classified information to journalists who were not authorized to view that information. Chelsea Manning disclosed large numbers of classified and unclassified documents to WikiLeaks and also claimed whistleblower status. Of course, we are not of the view that all these people deserve imprisonment. Our objective here is to simply point out a critical element integral to their cases, which is not applicable to the Clinton case. The last name on the screen is former CIA Director David Petraeus. In his case, he was prosecuted in part for deliberately sharing classified information with his biographer and lover at the time. Petraeus has been repeatedly mentioned for months in conservative media as a direct comparison to the Clinton case. As we look at all these names, let's ask a simple question. In contrast to all these people, did Clinton share classified material with anyone not authorized to view it? The answer is no. There is no evidence that she ever did that. Clinton emailed people who were authorized to view the content that was emailed to them. This is a simple yet critical point that is conveniently not mentioned to you by many people who have been eager to see her indicted. In fact, the importance of this aspect is evident from a question to Director Comey from a GOP congressman. The question was whether Clinton's lawyers, who sorted her emails, had the right security clearance. Comey gave an erroneous response. The Clinton campaign has since pointed out that, quote, the lawyers who sorted through Clinton's emails had top secret level clearance, end quote. Despite the obvious and critical difference between Clinton's case and that of these 7 other individuals, including David Petraeus, Clinton critics who are not particularly interested in facts keep bringing up these false comparisons. Case in point, Fox News. Here's Meghan McCain on Fox News deliberately propagating a false comparison and conspiracy theory, especially on David Petraeus, who was the director of the CIA in the Obama administration.
When if you have enough money, if you're powerful enough, if you have the right husband, you can do a lot of illegal stuff and you're not going to get charged. And I actually think Donald Trump's tweet talking about General Petraeus completely showcases the great juxtaposition between if you're a conservative, if you're a general, if you're someone that's not in line with the Obama administration, you'll go to jail or you'll, lose your job. But if you're Hillary Clinton, she can do whatever she wants.
FBI Director Comey directly addressed the absurdity of these false comparisons when he talked about the Petraeus case to Congress. Listen.
The Petraeus case, to my mind, illustrates perfectly the kind of cases the Department of Justice is willing to prosecute. Even there, they prosecuted him for a misdemeanor. In that case, you had vast quantities of highly classified information, including special sensitive compartmented information. That's the reference to code words. Vast quantity of it, not only shared with someone without authority to have it, but we found it in a search warrant hidden under the insulation in his attic, and then he lied to us about it during the investigation. So you have obstruction of justice, you have intentional misconduct, and a vast quantity of information. He admitted he knew that was the wrong thing to do. That is a perfect illustration of the kind of cases that get prosecuted. In my mind, it illustrates, importantly, the distinction to this case.
Comey later added a correction that they found Petraeus' documents not in his attic, but in his desk. He also explicitly addressed the Clinton comparison more directly.
So the question is, do you agree with the claim that General Petraeus, and I quote, got in trouble for far less, end of quote? Do you agree with that statement?
No, it's the reverse.
The second major category of false and misleading comparisons involved cases where defendants either lied to investigators, committed acts that were viewed as obstruction, or otherwise demonstrated a clear intent to break the law. Here are the names of 3 individuals that have been brought up in the context of Clinton's case. Public records indicate that Christian Saucer denied taking classified images, and when his act was discovered, tried to destroy the evidence. Brian Nishimura evidently downloaded classified material from a war zone to his personal device and retained some of it at home despite telling investigators he destroyed all of it. Scooter Libby, who was the chief of staff to former Vice President Dick Cheney, lied to investigators, even under oath, and was also charged with obstruction of justice. A Republican congressman asked FBI Director Comey about the Nishimura case, claiming it was similar to Clinton's case.
Are you familiar with Brian Nishimura's case?
Yes.
Okay, he's a naval reservist, for those who don't know, and he was prosecuted. What is the difference between his case and Hillary Clinton's case in terms of extremely carelessness and gross negligence? Because we're dealing with statute 793, section F, where it does not require intent. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, 793F is the gross negligence standard. That's
right,
1917.
right. And is that why Brian Nishimura was punished?
No, Nishimura was prosecuted under the misdemeanor statute 1924 on facts that are very different. If you want me to go through them, I'll go through them, but very different than...
Okay, I think that there's been a review of this case, and they're very similar, and that's why people feel that there's a double standard.
Right, what they're reading in the media is not a complete accounting of the facts in that case.
2 other names that have been mentioned are former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger and former Director of the CIA, John Deutch. In both these cases, public records indicate deliberate intent to access and remove classified documents and hide them, among other things. The Deutch case became the focus of a fanciful and wrong theory from Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC. Here's a clip of O'Donnell's claim discussing a statement by Director James Comey.
And he got to say this very important sentence, which is, we couldn't find a single case like this that supported criminal charges, not a single case. And I wondered, well, what if they could have found one? What if there was one? What if he had to say, well, there was this one other one? And that would be the case of John Deutch, which is so similar, CIA director under Bill Clinton.
O'Donnell went on to claim that Deutch's act was innocent and not intentional.
John Deutch actually reached a plea deal on the misdemeanor of simply mishandling of classified information. Mishandling is you're supposed to keep it here in this place, and you kept it somewhere else. In his case, he kept it at home. Right. No, that's Sandy Berger who took something out of it. Sandy Berger was willful.
That's right. Yeah, that's willful. Right.
His was willful act. So John Deutch was an innocent act.
FBI Director Comey was directly questioned about the Deutch case. Here is what he said, pointing out why the Clinton case was not similar to the Deutch case.
In my view, yes. The Deutch case illustrates it perfectly. And he took huge amount of documents, almost all at the TSSCI level, had them in hard copy at his house, had them on an unclassed system connected to the internet, attempted to destroy some of them when he got caught, admitted, I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing this. So you have clear intent, huge amounts of documents, obstruction of justice. Those are the kind of cases that get prosecuted. That's what I said when I meant it when I said it. In my experience, which is 3 decades, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. I know that frustrates people, but that's the way the law is, and that's the way the practice is of the Department of Justice.
In summary, what did Director Comey have to say on the question of whether Clinton's case involved any lying to investigators, obstruction of justice, or other circumstances of the kind seen in these other cases? His answer was clear. Clinton did not lie to investigators, did not obstruct justice, and did not demonstrate the intent to commit any illegal act. Which brings us to the third and equally important comparison being made, primarily by conservative critics of Clinton. This involves the gross negligence statute of the Espionage Act. Conservative critics have insisted that Clinton could easily have been charged under this statute, and they have repeatedly claimed it does not require a finding of intent. Is that true? In February 2016, several months before Comey announced his team's unanimous decision, Dan Abrams discussed the gross negligence law. Abrams is a top legal analyst for ABC and former anchor of Nightline. Abrams said, quote, "Reading this as a layperson, one might think this could be an easier crime to prove. Not so," end quote. The reason, as he pointed out, is that we need to go back through legal history to understand the accepted interpretation of this law, which is part of the Espionage Act. Abrams pointed out that, quote, "In 1941, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case which challenged whether the phrase national defense in this espionage law was too vague and overbroad," end quote. He observed that the court declined the challenge, but in doing so made the following observation, quote, "The obvious delimiting words in the statute are those requiring intent," end quote. The court went on to add that, quote, "This requires those prosecuted to have acted in bad faith," end quote. Abrams commented on the importance of the Supreme Court's interpretation on intent to injure the United States and bad faith, saying that other courts have therefore interpreted the phrase national defense narrowly. Additionally, Abrams discussed the term gross negligence, pointing out that this doesn't just mean stupidity or carelessness. He linked to a commonly accepted legal definition of gross negligence, which is, quote, "A lack of care that demonstrates reckless disregard for the safety or lives of others, which is so great it appears to be a conscious violation of other people's rights to safety. It is more than simple inadvertence," end quote. Based on this set of observations, Abrams quoted law professor Laurie Levinson, who analyzed the history of prosecutions for classified material cases and said, quote, "The Department of Justice appears to have gone after leakers, but not bunglers," end quote. Abrams concluded by saying, quote, "This espionage law clearly was never intended to address a Secretary of State using, foolishly or even improperly to maintain her privacy, a personal email server," end quote. Another expert, law professor Steve Vladek, has weighed in on this as well. In a communication with the Los Angeles Times, Vladek said, quote, "However much we might want federal law to make her carelessness a crime, nothing she did falls within the letter of the relevant federal criminal statutes," end quote. Needless to say, FBI Director Comey was asked repeatedly as to why he didn't recommend charging Clinton with gross negligence.
There is a statute that was passed in 1917 that on its face makes it a crime, a felony, for someone to engage in gross negligence. So that would appear to say, well, maybe in that circumstance, you don't need to prove they knew they were doing something that was unlawful. Maybe it's enough to prove that they were just really, really careless, beyond a reasonable doubt. At the time Congress passed that statute in 1917, there was a lot of concern in the House and the Senate about whether that was going to violate the American tradition of requiring that before you're going to lock somebody up, you prove they knew they were doing something wrong. And so there was a lot of concern about it. The statute was passed. As best I can tell, the Department of Justice has used it once in the 99 years since, reflecting that same concern. I know from 30 years with the Department of Justice, they have grave concerns about whether it's appropriate to prosecute somebody for gross negligence, which is why they've done it once that I know of in a case involving espionage. And so when I look at the facts we gathered here, as I said, I see evidence of great carelessness, but I do not see evidence that is sufficient to establish that Secretary Clinton or those with whom she was corresponding both talked about classified information on email and knew when they did it, they were doing something that was against the law. Right? So given that assessment of the facts, my understanding of the law, my conclusion was and remains, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. No reasonable prosecutor would bring the second case in 100 years focused on gross negligence. And so I know that's been a source of some confusion for folks. That's just the way it is. I know the Department of Justice. I know no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. I know a lot of my former friends are out there saying they would. I wonder where they were the last 40 years, because I'd like to see the cases they brought on gross negligence. Nobody would, nobody did. So,
when questioned again about why Clinton was not prosecuted for gross negligence, he went further by saying this would set a negative double standard.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on people's public statements. We did not find evidence sufficient to establish that she knew she was sending classified information beyond a reasonable doubt to meet that the intent standard. But like I said, I understand why people are confused by the whole discussion. I get that. But you know what would be a double standard? If she were prosecuted for gross negligence.
In fact, he even pointed out that there is a concern this statute might be unconstitutional.
Do you believe that that since the Department of Justice hasn't used the statute Congress passed, it's invalid?
No, I think they're worried that it's invalid, that it would be challenged on constitutional grounds, which is why they've used it extraordinarily sparingly in the decades.
Finally, he re-emphasized to GOP Representative Trey Gowdy that prosecuting Clinton for gross negligence would be celebrity hunting.
Decide, do I treat this person against that record? And if I do, is that a fair thing to do? Even if you're not worried about the constitutionality of it. And my judgment is no reasonable prosecutor would do that. That would be celebrity hunting. That would be treating this person differently than John Doe.
To watch the remaining parts of this video and to discover other such videos, go to electionado.com.